Chapter 41 Who Changed My Password? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Learning magic is just the beginning. Next, Daphne needs to master control. Rice wants her to maintain a small, self-sustaining cyclone of external magic until dinner. With the instructions given, he stepped back to let Daphne practice on her own. Practice makes perfect. Even in the magic world, repetition is key. Daphne, quite talented, progressed faster than less anticipated. Before lunch, she could consistently control the magic flow, keeping the cyclone stable in her palm. Alright, now try moving the magic to the soles of your feet. It's just like doing it with your hands, Les said, recalling Helga's teaching methods and guiding her step by step. Daphne nodded, ready to begin. To better control the magic, she took off her boots and socks, standing barefoot on the cold marble floor. The chill made her toes curl, but it also sharpened her focus. She concentrated, gathering magic in the center of each foot, forming two stable pools of energy. Under the influence of the magic, Daphne rose, hovering an inch above the ground. Les stared, stunned by her rapid progress. Wow! After a moment, he continued with his guidance, breaking down flying into a dozen individual steps. He explained that mastering each link would allow Daphne to string them all together to achieve flight. Daphne dove in head first, so focused she barely noticed the time. Les packed her lunch from the dining hall, bringing it to her in the secret room so she wouldn't have to stop practicing. She showed a remarkable gift, mastering flight in a single day. Be careful with your magic output. Don't rush and fly too high, too fast, Les cautioned as Daphne floated in the air, hoping she wouldn't ruin her progress by getting ahead of herself. Daphne, caught up in the moment, barely heard him. Humans have always dreamed of controlling the sky. Muggles built airplanes, wizards use broomsticks. But those rely on outside forces. This, flying using only her own magic, was true flight. Unlike being held aloft like a balloon, Daphne was flying by her own power. Her heart pounded with excitement, driving blood through her veins, buzzing in her ears. The wind whipped through her silver hair, her robes billowing behind her. Joy bubbled in her brain. She was doing it, flying free like a bird. Finally, as evening approached, she reluctantly returned to the floor of the secret room. Flying took a lot out of her. She was pale and exhausted. I need to hit the potion storage at Hogwarts for ingredients and make a batch of restorative potions for her. Les thought. If they don't have what I need, I'll have to write Lupert and ask her to pick some up. The potion ingredient supply at Hogwarts wasn't heavily guarded. Les could easily grab a few extras during class and slip them into his bag, but the easy pickings were just the basics. For anything rare, you either had to buy it yourself or borrow it from Snape's stash. That's amazing. I've never seen such a quick start, he said, deciding to focus on the immediate win. To go from zero knowledge of magic control to flying in a single day was a true testament to her talent. Good thing she found a traditional teacher like me. He thought. Her talent would have been wasted in the modern magic system. Really? Daphne, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up, eyes shining. Can I practice again tomorrow? Let's call it a day, Les said firmly. Enough is enough. You've done great. Here. He pulled a box of chocolate frogs from his robes. Eat some chocolate and get your strength back, then we can head to the dining hall for dinner. And tomorrow? Daphne asked, worried he might not want to continue training. Don't you get a weekend? Weekends are for Muggles. Wizards don't do weekends. Daphne replied, making Les laugh. He couldn't refuse a student who wanted to learn that badly. Les agreed to more lessons. Actually, let's go out another way, Les said, stopping Daphne from heading for the secret room door. After flying through the pipe at noon, he vowed to never go back through that sewer. He had already sealed that pipe. No way a Slytherin, especially Slytherin's favorite heir, should enter the secret room through a sewer. Disgraceful, star. Another way out? Of course. Les led Daphne to his statue and stepped on a specific marble tile on the floor. A 2-meter square tile rose, lifting them up to the statue's face. Les looked at the statue and spoke in Parseltongue, open. 0.1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds, nothing happened. Les raised an eyebrow. Open. He repeated, but still nothing. Why isn't my password working? As the true owner of the secret room, Les had ultimate authority here. He couldn't be locked out by a password. Reveal the password, he commanded. One of the statue's eyes lit up, shining a beam of light onto the marble slab, revealing the current password. Speak to me, Slytherin, the greatest of the Hogwarts Four. Les paused. He felt his blood rushing, chest tightening, dizziness hitting hard. Who changed my password to this? Worse, Daphne saw it too. Les's face burned. That's so flattering, thought at least the other three founders wouldn't see it. He could imagine their mockery. Godric's voice echoed in his head, shouting gleefully, the greatest of Hogwarts. Les grimaced. Chapter 42 will become Malfoy-chan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After killing the password projection, Les shot a guilty glance at Daphne. Luckily, the kid seemed okay. Maybe she hadn't gotten a good look at the whole password, or maybe she just figured that sentence was correct. After pulling rank to change the password back, Les said the statue's password a third time. Open. This time, something happened. The huge stone face shifted, its mouth opening into a massive black hole. As the cave entrance appeared, a rustling sound came from inside, like something was stirring within the statue's mouth. Les's face changed. He knew immediately, it was the Snake King he'd left in the secret room, woken up. He quickly gave it new instructions: go back and hide. The sounds in the cave gradually faded. What was that? Daphne wasn't deaf, she'd definitely heard the Snake King moving. Les gave her a quick explanation, and she fell silent. So there's a giant snake, over 20 feet long, hiding in the statue. Daphne was having second thoughts about going in. It was a toss-up whether sewer pipes full of grime were more disgusting, or a tunnel hiding a giant snake was more psychologically disturbing. Rice, oblivious to the girl's change of heart, led Daphne straight into the statue's mouth. Contrary to the exterior, the tunnel inside the statue was spacious and flat, with empty candlesticks mounted on the walls every few feet. Les had to conjure a flame for light. Traces of large snakes slithering were visible on the ground, obviously left by the Snake King. Daphne was still a bit nervous, worried about running into the monster around some corner. Luckily, the Snake King was well hidden, and she didn't see a trace of it until they reached the tunnel's end. The spell here is similar to the one on the wall in the Leaky Cauldron's backyard. You'll be able to pick up on it when your magic gets stronger, Les said to Daphne, standing before a thick stone wall. Daphne became curious about how Les saw the world. Me? Pretty much like everyone else, except my perception of magic is sharper. If I notice something and focus my magic on my eyes, what I see does change. I can see the flow of magic. For instance, right now, most people just see a wall. But I see the whole thing shimmering with magic. Daphne stared intently at the wall, but her eyes just got tired. She couldn't sense any magic flow. You're not quite there yet, but you will be. Les gave her a reassuring nod, then pressed his wand against a stone brick. 7 down and 7 across. With a touch, the brick sank and disappeared. Then, like a chain reaction, the entire stone wall vanished, revealing the exit. Emerging from the tunnel, Daphne recognized where they were, next to the underground dock where they'd arrived by boat on opening day. On the way back to the common room, Daphne couldn't help asking about tomorrow's lesson. Les told her he planned to review the flying magic from today, then teach her a practical protection spell. This spell had a simplified, modern version, the Iron Armor Curse. It was a pretty advanced spell that many Hogwarts grads couldn't even manage. Les thought it was nowhere near as good as the defensive magic he was teaching Daphne, too rigid, and beyond beginners. But for magic masters, its potential wasn't high enough, it felt a little showy. His own defensive magic, however, could be used by beginners after a bit of practice, even if the initial defense was weak. But as the caster got stronger, the spell's defense could be stacked almost infinitely. Just as Les expected, Daphne picked up the spell in a single day, able to summon her magic power to form a thin protective shield in front of her. It might not stop a brick thrown at her, but it was a step forward from zero, and the rest was just a matter of time. Les couldn't help but be thrilled. He'd struck gold, and his skills would live on. After a week of serious classes, Les adjusted his life to a rhythm he enjoyed. Just one history of magic session on Monday. Awesome, my weekend starts in 3 days. What? The professor piled on the homework. No sweat. Daphne, come here, let me check your work. Back at Hogwarts, Les's life had become much sweeter. No more daily lesson prep, no more worrying about dim-witted medieval mini-wizards, and no more cleaning up after high-spirited students. By comparison, Les was inexplicably happy. Especially when he saw Professor Snape cursing and scrambling to deal with the mess left by his students. He was glad he wasn't head of the house anymore. Malfoy, who'd had that run-in with him, seemed to have complained to his dad, but Lucius Malfoy wasn't rushing to his defense. Without his father's backing, Malfoy quickly forgot about the little dust-up with Les and turned his attention to Harry Potter. Les could tell Malfoy had initially wanted to be friends with Potter, but Slytherin House's rep held him back and squashed the budding friendship in the crib. Of course, the school's bad name was only a minor issue. Malfoy's awful personality was the real problem. He was loud, flashy, and obnoxious. If he didn't have a rich dad, upperclassmen would have shoved him in the toilet and beaten him senseless. The first week of school, Malfoy kept bragging about his prominent family to anyone who'd listen. By the second week, it was all about Quidditch, and he spent the whole day talking about flying, loudly complaining at dinner that first-years weren't allowed on the house Quidditch team. He liked to hang around Daphne and loudly spin tales of his childhood flying adventures. The stories changed, but the ending was always the same. Draco Malfoy, ace flyer, narrowly escaped a Muggle helicopter. Daphne, having already experienced the joys of flying herself, hadn't cared at first. But Malfoy got on her nerves, so she finally snapped. My hair was just inches from the propeller, I could feel the powerful wind. Malfoy was wrapping up his usual story when a girl's voice cut him off. You sure it was inches? Daphne asked, glancing at him. Positive. Malfoy said, thumping his chest. Daphne didn't say anything. She'd heard of Muggle vehicles like helicopters. She gave Les a quick rundown of the structure, and Les turned a pair of knives and forks on the table into a helicopter, and a grilled steak into a little dude on a broomstick. While Malfoy looked on, baffled, Daphne made the little guy fly towards the hovering helicopter, and then, bang. The little dude got sucked into the propeller and turned into instant meat paste. Meat sauce and grease splattered everywhere, one drop landing right on Malfoy's face, who was speechless. So how'd you survive that? Or is Malfoy family medicine so advanced it can put meat paste back together? Daphne asked Malfoy with a smile. Malfoy, Daphne wins. Updates here. Part 2 will be up when you wake up. New. Chapter 43, Skills that even Slytherin failed to master. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Quidditch? I never expected it to get so popular. After dealing with Malfoy's nonsense, Les felt like nothing was normal anymore. Hey, did you know Quidditch and Slytherin have a connection? On a whim, Les decided to tell the nearby students a story about the sport's origins. In Slytherin House, anyone telling a story about Salazar Slytherin always gets an audience. As soon as Les started, he noticed several pairs of eyes, some obvious, some not, focusing on him. Quidditch is huge now, but get this, back in the 11th century, when the founders were around, it was a total flop. People were more into stuff like throwing rocks or ramming into each other mid-air. More students started paying close attention. The sports Les mentioned were once popular in the Middle Ages, but now they're extinct, mostly because they were so dangerous. Take catching stones, for example, a super violent game where players strapped cauldrons to their heads and tried to catch enchanted rocks falling from 100 feet up. You can imagine the casualty rate. They literally called it injured head. Only a nutcase would play. Quidditch wouldn't exist without a witch named Gertie Kettle. Les launched into his story. Ha! Godric, I'm flying. Salazar Slytherin yelled, circling in the air on his broom. What is that thing? You can just levitate a normal broom with magic. Godric Gryffindor, without hesitation, undid his friend's spell. Salazar, unable to move at all, had no choice but to cast a levitation spell on an ordinary broom, allowing it to float on its back. "You said it wasn't flying," Slytherin retorted, a bit annoyed. For some reason, he just couldn't get the hang of flying brooms. Even with magic helping him, it was still embarrassing. What wizard can't ride a broomstick? Okay, wanna toss some stones around?" Godric was eager to try it. Slytherin went silent. He felt like he was staring into a feedback loop of crazy. Only someone with a few screws loose would play catching stones. After playing, they'd be even crazier, and then they'd really want to play catching stones. Slytherin decided to fulfill his duty as a friend and save Gryffindor from serious head trauma, so he invented a game on the spot. It was kind of like the Muggle game where kids try to knock ducks off a log at a carnival. Two people throw balls at each other, and you lose points if you get hit. How hard can it be? Just watch the ball. Godric, excited, conjured a ball and immediately smacked Slytherin in the face. They were having a blast until Godric's conjured ball accidentally landed in Gertie Kettle's vegetable patch. Gertie confiscated the ball and blasted the two men with a few curses. Les and Godric retreated, defeated. But the game wasn't over. They weren't done having fun, so the next day, they came back. Godric made a new ball, and Les tweaked the rules. To avoid a repeat of yesterday, he decided to change the scoring by throwing the ball into the woods at one end of the swamp. That was the prototype of the quaffle and the scoring hoops. Later, to make it more interesting, they enchanted two stones to fly around and interfere with their throws, which became the bludgers. Since the swamp was called Quidditch, Slytherin named the sport Quidditch. And that's where it all started, that when Les finished his story, the other students erupted in discussion. "So that's why we're so good at Quidditch. Slytherin invented it, we were born to play. Were Slytherin and Gryffindor good friends?" "Yeah, at first they were." "What about the golden snitch?" "I know. Is that another ancient wizard text thing?" Daphne asked, raising an eyebrow. Les looked away, silently acknowledging her spot-on guess. After Daphne humiliated Malfoy in the Great Hall, the freshmen suddenly stopped bragging about their flying abilities. Les's story about the origin of Quidditch started to spread. And so, the first flying lesson for the first-year Slytherin students finally arrived. The weather was perfect, and everyone was excited. For the Slytherin newcomers, Thursday was shaping up to be great. The only downside was sharing the lesson with Gryffindors. Their flying instructor was Madame Hooch, a woman with short gray hair and sharp, yellow eyes like an eagle. They said she used to be on a professional Quidditch team and retired to teach at Hogwarts. Teaching at Hogwarts was a great gig compared to other retirement options, so she took her job seriously. "Alright, no time to waste," she snapped. "Everyone stand next to a broom and hurry up." Les looked down at his broom. It was old, worn, and the bristles were a mess. An unpleasant feeling crept in. Les remembered his past failures, but he also felt a sliver of hope. Back then, the broomsticks were awful. Maybe it was a quality control problem with the brooms themselves. 1,000 years had passed, surely broomsticks had become more user-friendly, right? Technology improves things, right? Right hand out, over the broom handle, and say, "Up." Madame Hooch shouted, demonstrating herself. "Up." The students echoed. "Up," Les said to the broom at his feet. The broom just lay there, rolling around like it had no intention of listening. Malfoy, standing nearby, burst out laughing. He'd finally found something Les wasn't good at. Chapter 44 Accident in Flying Lesson. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hey Les, you good? Need me to show you how it's done? Unlike Les, Malfoy's broom practically leaped into his hand the moment he called for it. Of course, not all brooms are that eager to please. Daphne's, just like Les's, only rolled around on the ground, and some of the younger wizards' brooms didn't even budge. Even though it wasn't as bad as before, Les could feel his blood pressure creeping up. Since he'd become younger, his emotions were all over the place. It was just a young body's instinct, annoying but not something Les planned to fight. "Get up." He tried again, but the broom only twitched. Seriously? A Slytherin who can't even summon a broom? No way. No freakin' way. Malfoy's voice cut through the air. Well, even after 1,000 years, broomstick quality was still hit or miss. Les decided to try his own unique approach. As for Draco Malfoy's needling, he ignored it. A true Slytherin should be at odds with a flying broom. Kids like Daphne Greengrass were the kind of student Salazar Slytherin was actually looking for. Seeing Daphne struggle with her broom, Les felt a little better. It's gotta be the broom. This thing looks like it's about to fall apart. Hogwarts is loaded, why not spend some money to update these things? Then it hit him, who's on the Hogwarts school board? Mostly pureblood families who donate a ton of money, otherwise the school couldn't afford all the expenses. That also meant a huge Slytherin presence on the board, and those guys were always gonna favor their own. In their eyes, Slytherin winning the House Cup and the Quidditch Cup was all that mattered. So how could they subtly undermine the other three houses? They weren't gonna hire ringers to play Quidditch, so they focused on the brooms used for practice. For most students, a broom was a serious luxury. Except for rich kids from Slytherin, most students used the school's brooms, and there was nothing in the rules about using your own. It was like a Muggle race where some people had souped-up scooters and others had supercars. The supercar guys were gonna win every time. That's why Hogwarts never updated the free brooms, sticking with ancient models while the Slytherin Quidditch team always had the best gear. It was no wonder the Slytherin team always did so well. While Les was having this realization, Madam Hooch was at the front of the class, demonstrating the proper way to mount a broom without falling on your face. There are two main styles, side saddle and straddling. Les finally gave up on the traditional method and switched to his own levitation spell. He was about to get a crash course in the advances in broomstick technology over the last 1,000 years. A medieval broom was basically just a regular broom with a levitation charm slapped on it. Brooms today were a whole different story, equipped with spells to resist magical interference. Regular levitation spells were useless against them, only serious dark magic could mess with them, which meant Les's plan wasn't gonna work for Les. His spell failed, and the broom stayed glued to the ground, even more stubborn than before. Malfoy's mocking glare felt like a physical sting. Daphne, facing the same problem, looked like she was about to crack under the pressure. After a moment of hesitation, she bent down to pick up her broom. It was embarrassing, but what else could she do? She needed to learn how to ride. Les scoffed. He wasn't about to grovel. A little anti-curse to keep him from doing magic. Please. It was more like a symbolic gesture than anything else. He amped up his spell, and that's when things went sideways. The school's brooms were falling apart and practically antiques. Since it was his first time cracking this type of spell, Les overestimated the anti-curse strength. His enhanced spell washed away the barrier like a flood, and then backfired. More than 20 brooms around him were suddenly affected. Whoosh whoosh. Only wizards like Madam Hooch, Malfoy, and Harry, who had amazing broom control or high-quality brooms, managed to hold on. The rest of the students' brooms went haywire and shot into the sky like rockets. In a split second, over 20 brooms were 20 feet in the air. Les. He really hadn't expected the school brooms to be so fragile. He should have reduced the spell's power to 1/10. This probably wouldn't have happened. The broom, Les Lint, was too powerful. I couldn't let him unleash his full potential during the flying lesson. My apologies. Les's regrets didn't bring the brooms back down. The class descended into chaos, and Madam Hooch forgot all about the students. She hopped on her broom and chased after the runaway brooms. In the middle of the craziness, Malfoy spotted Harry clutching his broom like his life depended on it. Huh? He didn't fall off. Impressive. Wait a minute. A light bulb went off in Malfoy's head, and a mischievous plan began to form. Hey, Potter, you got the guts to challenge me? He raised an eyebrow, looking at Harry with a smirk. What's your game, Malfoy? Harry despised Malfoy. He hadn't thought anyone could be more annoying than Dudley, until he met Draco Malfoy. How about we see who can catch more brooms? Malfoy gestured to the chaos in the sky. Give it a rest. Ron, who was standing nearby, couldn't hold back anymore. He burst out, challenging someone who's only touched a broom for 5 minutes to a flying competition. That's low, even for you. Alright, just forget I said anything. Malfoy shrugged, pretending to be chastised, hopped on his broom, and took off. Chapter 45 Daphne, that's it. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Watching Malfoy zoom into the sky amidst the screams, Harry's blood started to boil. Don't listen to him, Harry. He's just trying to get a rise out of you, Ron said, knowing his friend pretty well, but Ron's words didn't work. Harry was usually easygoing, but once he made up his mind, there was no stopping him. He hopped on his broom, using the stance Mrs. Hooch had taught them, gave a hard push, and shot into the air after Malfoy. Harry! Ron's face went white. Harry had lived with his aunt and uncle and never even touched a broom. This could be a disaster. Harry and Malfoy soaring into the sky one after the other shocked the Gryffindor and Slytherin freshmen. Gasps and screams were audible even from dozens of feet away. Mrs. Hooch had already caught 2 runaway brooms. She hadn't been paying attention to the commotion. The little wizards had never seen anything like this before, so it was normal for them to be startled. She needed to catch the brooms quickly, otherwise, knowing the school board, they could expect no flying lessons for the rest of the semester, but when she caught a glimpse of black and green out of the corner of her eye, she realized how serious it was. She whipped her head around and saw 2 little wizards flying on brooms. Mrs. Hooch felt like she'd been smacked twice on the head with a club. When she came to her senses, she yelled at the top of her lungs, "You two, stop it." But if those 2 kids were going to listen just because a teacher yelled at them, they wouldn't be up in the sky in the first place. Malfoy completely ignored Madame Hooch, and Harry was too caught up in the excitement to pay attention. Malfoy swooped under a broom, grabbed it, and landed with it tucked under his arm, laughing. Not to be outdone, Harry, riding a broom and flying for the first time, was a natural. He leaned forward, gripped the broom tightly, and shot like a javelin toward the loose brooms in the sky. In a flash, he was level with them. Harry maneuvered, grabbing the 2 brooms like headless chickens. He clamped them between his legs, and they turned around and dove toward the ground. The students watching below cheered, but when they saw Harry's crazy dive, they all gasped. Malfoy, hearing the applause, felt a surge of pride. But just as he was landing triumphantly, Harry zoomed past him, leaving only a blur. Malfoy was stunned. He never imagined that Harry, who had never touched a broom before, could fly so well. Seeing Harry land among the Gryffindor team and win cheers, Malfoy couldn't help but curl his lip, secretly cursing Harry for stealing his thunder. After thinking for a moment, he came up with a cooler landing. Blocking out all thoughts of Harry, Malfoy flicked his broom and drifted to a stop right in front of Daphne. Feeling pretty pleased with himself, Malfoy held up the broom and confidently told Daphne, "Here, I got your broom back." In Malfoy's mind, Daphne would be impressed by his charm. All she had to do was play along, and he'd completely overshadow Harry, but reality didn't quite match his script. Hearing Malfoy, Daphne couldn't help but roll her eyes. No thanks. She even took a step back, distancing herself from him. Malfoy's cool facade crumbled. The muscles in his face twitched. After a few seconds, Malfoy finally reacted and tossed the broom to the guy next to him. Pansy, kicked off the ground, and shot back into the sky. He needed this to save face, but before he'd gone far, a shadow zipped past him. Malfoy thought it was Potter, but it was Daphne. What was even more shocking was that she wasn't riding a broom. She held her wand in her right hand, her left arm at her side, and glanced back at him with a blank expression. "I can get it myself," she said, before turning and soaring higher. Everyone except Les was stunned. They believed wizards needed brooms or similar magical objects to fly. How could anyone fly on their own? Malfoy stood frozen, staring at Daphne's back. "You! Get down! Here!" A furious shout exploded in his ears, followed by a sharp pain. Mrs. Hooch swooped down on her broom, grabbed his ear, and dragged Malfoy and his broom back to the ground. Mrs. Hooch's face was pale with anger, and her hands were shaking. Not only did she catch Malfoy in the sky, but Harry, who had already landed, and Daphne, who had just returned to the ground, were also caught. You, and you. How dare you three? You could have broken your necks. Harry was trying to be good, hanging his head and taking the scolding, while Daphne and Malfoy were clearly not happy. Malfoy didn't believe he could have fallen off his broom. He'd been flying since he was 5. Daphne was even more confident, because she relied entirely on her flying magic, while the other two needed brooms, but they both knew better than to talk back, so they kept their mouths shut. Harry Potter. Professor McGonagall's voice cut through Mrs. Hooch's rant. Harry looked up, his heart sinking. Professor McGonagall was storming toward him. 10 points from Gryffindor. Potter, come with me. Professor, Harry, he. That's enough, Mr. Weasley. Seeing Harry get points deducted and get dragged away, Malfoy almost laughed, but the next second wiped the smile off his face. 20 points from Slytherin. Miss Greengrass, Mr. Malfoy, you two come with me too. Team building today. The next update will be in the early morning. It may be a little later, you can wake up and watch it. Thanks for the tip if you can't think of a good name. Thanks to Mr. Mingwe for the reward. Love you guys. New. Chapter 46 Confinement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Professor McGonagall laid out Malfoy's punishment, his face twisted. McGonagall had a reputation for being strict, never showing favoritism, treating all houses equally, and ignoring family influence when dishing out punishments. In short, pulling the "my father will hear about this" card wouldn't work. He'd just have to suck it up. Malfoy was bummed, but Harry was in despair. He felt like he was about to be expelled. He'd barely been at Hogwarts for 2 weeks, and in 10 minutes, he'd be packing his bags. He dreaded to think what the Dursleys would say when he showed up on their doorstep. It wouldn't be anything pleasant. Daphne was a little nervous, but she quickly calmed down, figuring Malfoy and Harry had made far worse mistakes than she had. Mr. Malfoy, Mr. Potter, for your serious violation of flying lesson rules, you'll both serve detention with Madam Hooch. Any objections? Relieved he wasn't being kicked out, Harry nodded eagerly, saying he was fine with it. Malfoy wanted to argue, but knew it was pointless and just resigned himself to his bad luck. Having dealt with Harry and Malfoy, Professor McGonagall turned to Daphne. Miss Greengrass, can you explain how you did that just now? Malfoy and Harry perked up, curious to know how Daphne had flown. It's flying magic, Daphne replied, her answer echoing something out of absurd literature. Even though Les hadn't told her to keep his secret, Daphne instinctively covered for him. Maybe it was selfish, wanting to keep his knowledge to herself, or maybe she just didn't want to get him in trouble. Where did you learn it? Professor McGonagall asked, unable to help herself. Her gut told her Daphne wasn't telling the truth, but flying magic was so rare, she had to try and find out the source. Hearing flying magic, Malfoy's expression changed. His father had told him that the Dark Lord possessed a unique secret called flying magic. He was one of the very few wizards who could fly without a broom. Now Daphne was claiming she could do flying magic. Could it be that the Greengrass family, but they'd been neutral during the last Wizarding War? Young Malfoy couldn't figure it out. Professor McGonagall shared the same concerns. She worried that Daphne's flying magic might have come from the Dark Lord, which wouldn't be good, but when questioned, Daphne simply stayed silent. Professor McGonagall stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head, deciding to drop it. The ancient Greengrass family might indeed have some flying magic hidden away in their vaults. But either way, Professor Dumbledore needed to know about this. All right, you two can go. Mr. Malfoy, Madam Hooch will email you regarding your detention. Professor McGonagall dismissed Malfoy and Daphne, but held Harry back. This made Harry's heart jump into his throat. Ha! Potter's done for. I bet he'll be expelled. Once Professor McGonagall and Harry were out of sight, Malfoy said gleefully. You haven't even been expelled, how could he be? Daphne replied coolly, shooting him a look. She'd seen everything that happened, and she knew who was really to blame. Daphne was right. At dinner, Harry showed up in the Great Hall, and Malfoy looked like someone had punched him. Judging by how quickly the detention details arrived, Madam Hooch was still fuming. During dinner, an owl delivered their punishment. Tonight, they had to report to her to repair and maintain broomsticks. Arriving at the broom shed, Madame Hooch divided the brooms used in today's class into 2 piles, then tossed a broomstick care manual, 2 cans of broom polish, and 2 pairs of gardening shears at them. Your task is to wax the broom handles and trim the frayed broom tails. Madame Hooch's voice was icy. After a quick explanation, she left the shed, warning them before she left that if the maintenance wasn't up to par, she'd request additional detention, so they better not slack off. Harry and Malfoy sat in opposite corners of the room, as far apart as possible. It was obvious that Malfoy hadn't had house elves do his broom maintenance as a child. His movements were so deft that by the time Harry finished 1 broom, Malfoy had already done 3. Can you hurry up? I want to get back early, Malfoy said, his face darkening as he looked at Harry's progress. If Malfoy had taken a few brooms from Harry to repair as an apology, their strained relationship might have improved, but Malfoy wasn't that kind of person. All he cared about was getting back to the common room. Repair Harry's brooms? Not if you were his father's illegitimate son. Don't worry, you can leave as soon as you're done and go hang out with your animal friends. Harry shot back, rolling his eyes and speeding up his trimming. I'm not leaving. What if someone messes with my broom again? Do you think I can't see what you're up to? Draco Malfoy. Harry slammed his broom on the ground. Do you think everyone's as bad as you are? Malfoy shut his mouth and silently went back to his broom. But the silence only made his thoughts run wild. Potter, you ever heard of wizard duels? Having finished the last broom, Malfoy spoke up again. Harry kept his head down, silently polishing his broom. He'd never heard of wizard duels, but it wasn't hard to figure out what they were. He just didn't want to talk to Malfoy. Doesn't matter if you haven't. Go ask Weasley, he'll tell you what a wizard's duel is. Anyway, if you two are feeling brave, meet us in the trophy room at midnight tomorrow night. We can have a proper duel to settle things. Today's match is still undecided. Update provided, second update in the afternoon. Sorry, it's a bit late, I hope you guys slept in over the weekend. Chapter 47 I want to hire Malfoy to fight for me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everyone's destiny is different. While Harry and Malfoy glumly accepted Mrs. Hooch's judgment, Daphne became the talk of the school. Her sky-high flight was legendary, and everyone wanted to know her secret. Maybe if they asked around, they could learn the spell, too. Flying on a broomstick was one thing, but those things were practically as tall as you were. It would be awesome to know a flying spell, especially for astronomy, divination, and any other classes way up in the tower. You could just fly right up. After leaving Professor McGonagall, Daphne found Les waiting for her. Remembering Les's advice, she explained that she'd found the spell on a scroll in her attic. Miraculously, after reading it, the scroll disintegrated, and she instantly mastered the spell. Daphne's family was one of the most respected in Slytherin, so people would have believed her even if she said the portrait of Slytherin himself taught her the spell. Wasn't it normal for old wizarding families to have forgotten and misunderstood things laying around? Some of the smart kids chimed in, saying that long ago, even before the Middle Ages, wizards used similar methods to pass down spells. Daphne's scroll was probably an ancient wizard's flying inheritance. Maybe the Greengrass ancestors found it, but it wasn't used for some reason, so it was forgotten until Daphne, the chosen one, opened it. Les scratched his head, listening to the students' clear, logical explanations. They were so convincing, he wondered if they could explain it away even if she said Slytherin taught her the spell directly. Slytherin used magic to communicate with the gods. This is normal. Isn't it normal for a pureblood family like Greengrass to be favored by Slytherin? Gryffindor gets the sorting hat, but Slytherin doesn't get the inheritance of a curse. That's what happened, Albus. At the staff table, Professor McGonagall recounted the afternoon's events to Dumbledore. Oh. I didn't realize Harry was so talented at Quidditch. Dumbledore set down his spoon with a serious expression. I think we should make an exception and recruit him for the Gryffindor Quidditch team immediately. McGonagall was speechless. She hadn't expected Dumbledore to focus on that. And his serious expression didn't quite fit the subject. I've made up my mind, Albus. As for Daphne, everyone has secrets, including me. I don't think we need to pry into everyone's private life. Besides, isn't it normal for a greengrass to have special magical abilities? Professor McGonagall sighed. If Dumbledore was okay with it, she would trust his judgment. As long as he knew, that was enough, but she had one more question. What about the brooms? Why did they all go haywire? I suspect it was a magical surge from one of the young wizards. Minerva, you know there are many types of magical surges. Dumbledore's eyes flickered for a moment, then returned to normal, an unnoticeable change. Some kids make a big mess, while others just silently vanish glass or make withered flowers bloom. Maybe one of them caused the accident. They've only been here for 2 weeks. It's normal, it's not all bad. We can ask the school board for funds to replace those decades-old brooms. Professor McGonagall scoffed. More likely they'll find a broom expert to certify them as still safe. The flying lesson incident faded. The real cause hid in Daphne's shadow, like a snake waiting to strike, its tracks undetectable. Say yes. Ron didn't hesitate for even a second after hearing about Malfoy's duel invitation. A real man doesn't back down from a duel. I'll be your second. Harry nodded. He would have agreed even without Ron's encouragement because he wanted to beat Malfoy to a pulp. He may not know wizard duels, but he knew how to fight. What's a wizard's duel? Are there rules? Harry frowned after listening to Ron's explanation. Only wands. So if I die, you'll take my place. Don't worry. You both know too little magic to really hurt each other. Malfoy can barely shoot sparks with that little stick, his fists are more dangerous than your wands. Ron calmly laid out Malfoy's plan. He's betting you'll chicken out so he can laugh at you. Ron had Malfoy pegged. Luckily, you don't know much about wizard duels. If it were me, I might have folded. So, I should accept. Absolutely. Ron's analysis was spot on. Malfoy was clearly surprised to hear that Harry had accepted. After a pause, he said, Good. Meet me in the trophy room tonight. The door's always unlocked. He hurried off before they could confirm his second. I envy you, Harry. You finally get to punch Malfoy in the face without getting in trouble. Ron looked jealous. Harry couldn't help but smile at the thought. Thanks to his cousin Dudley's training, he was pretty good at fighting. The problem was that Dudley always had a serious weight advantage. Instead of turning to his goons, Malfoy found Les in the library. Les, I want you to be my second, he said before Daphne could get a word in. Chapter 48 No one knows school rules better than me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dual assistant? Me? Les was momentarily stunned by Malfoy's request. It had been ages since anyone had asked him to be a dueling second. Malfoy, you, Daphne started to refuse for Les, but he raised a hand to stop her. Draco Malfoy, are you sure you want to duel? Malfoy had completely piqued Les's interest, a duel. This was a duel. But who had earned Malfoy's ire so intensely that he'd resort to a duel? Malfoy swallowed, nodding. It's not a duel to the death. I just want to settle some personal beef with Potter from Gryffindor. Les nodded. That tracked. It would have been weird if Malfoy were in a fight to the death. Besides, wizards their age rarely used magic to kill. 100 galleons. Give me 100 galleons, and I'll be your dueling second. Are you trying to rob me? Malfoy's eyes nearly popped out of his head. 100 galleons. That's almost a year's expenses for an average wizarding family of 3, enough to clean out Malfoy's piggy bank. That's a steal, actually. Les spread his hands, implying he couldn't go any lower. He thought, 1,000 years ago, you think you could have hired me for 100 gold coins to second you? Dream on. Of course, one was fighting a powerful dark wizard in a death match, and the other was helping some kids settle a squabble. Different levels of difficulty. But still, considering his reputation and his non-existent relationship with Draco Malfoy, Les decided on 100 galleons. If Malfoy could afford it, great, they'd go through the motions. If not, no harm, no foul. Malfoy's face twitched. He asked if he could get a discount. After Les refused, he gritted his teeth and agreed. But you pay afterwards. Les immediately refused. That wasn't the way things were done. Fine, can I pay half now? I'll give you the rest after the duel. Malfoy practically choked on the words. Les thought for a moment, then remembered that Malfoy's ancestor had also paid half up front when he'd asked him to arrange a marriage. He felt a strange sense of fate, so he agreed. As 50 golden galleons landed on the table, Les could practically hear Malfoy's bank account screaming. Watching Malfoy stumble out of the library, Les couldn't help but feel a little nostalgic. The Malfoy family was paying me 1,000 years ago, and the Malfoy family is still paying me 1,000 years later. Some things never change. Looking at the stunned Daphne across from him, Les grinned. You can earn 100 galleons by babysitting a kid. Easiest money ever. No, I just think you're practically giving away those calming candles and evil spirit repellents, Daphne said, shaking her head, feeling like she was missing something. No need to gouge people on life-saving supplies. A few 100 galleons was enough back then. Daphne countered, my dad's loaded. Don't be shy. He's wasted tons on quack doctors trying to cure my sister. Les just TSK edition. He didn't know how to respond to that. Sorry to interrupt. Hermione's voice suddenly came from behind the nearby bookshelf. Les, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I have to tell you, you shouldn't be wandering around the school at night. Think of all the points you'll lose if you get caught. Hermione emerged, clutching a stack of books. Points deducted from Slytherin House. What's that got to do with you as a Ravenclaw? Les was taken aback. What kind of bleeding heart was this? I'm just reminding you as a friend that it's against the rules. Hermione looked a little irritated. Les raised 2 fingers and said seriously, 2 things. 1, I won't get caught, they can't catch me. And 2, this specific situation is allowed by the rules. Huh? Hermione was stunned. She subconsciously ignored the first point and focused on the second. Hogwarts School Rule 47 states that the school guarantees students' rights to participate in duels. If the duel time conflicts with curfew, duelists are exempt. Godric Gryffindor established this rule. Les was intimately familiar with the school rules. No one at Hogwarts knew them better than him. After all, he and his buddies had written them over drinks. Hermione was speechless. A few seconds later, she hurried off, returning moments later with a thick book in her arms. Judging by the dust on the cover, no one had checked it out in ages. The book was called Hogwarts School Rules Detailed, a comprehensive record of the rules. Hermione flipped through the pages quickly, finding the rule Les mentioned. See? I wasn't lying. Les shrugged. He was totally lying. He was using his knowledge of the rules to trick Hermione. The loophole about duels and curfew only applied if the student's head of house was aware of the duel. Snape would never approve of a silly little duel. Les's truth, which omitted key facts, fooled Hermione, leaving her feeling I don't get it, but I'm impressed. At 11:30 p.m., Les sat up in bed. Draco had already left. He'd said he wanted to familiarize himself with the terrain of the duel location. Les threw on his robes, grabbed his wand, and quietly slipped out of the common room. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and walked down a corridor that bypassed the trophy room. Malfoy wasn't there. Footsteps echoed behind Les. He turned to see Harry and Ron. Les's face fell. He could guess what had happened. Is that you, Les? Why isn't Malfoy here? Seeing Les alone in the trophy room, Harry and Ron looked shocked. They didn't know Les well, only that he was good at potions and spells. Hold on. Let's hope Mr. Malfoy has a bad case of the runs. Les took a deep breath to calm them down. Time passed, but Malfoy didn't show. Then, the voice of Filch, the caretaker, echoed from the next room. Chapter 49. No one is allowed to tarnish the glory of wizards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sniff around, Han, see if they're hiding. That was Filch talking to his cat, Mrs. Norris. Harry and Ron were spooked, but before they could react, Les walked up and tapped them on the head with his wand. Harry felt like someone had cracked an egg on his head, and he couldn't help but shudder. Shoo! Les said softly, I've cast a disillusionment charm on you too. Keep it down. That he reined in his own nerves and pulled them into the corner of the trophy room. Harry looked down at his hands and saw they were turning see-through. It was a seriously weird feeling. He was standing right there, but he couldn't see his own body. They're here somewhere, probably hiding. Filch's muttering grew louder. A light shone in the doorway, and Filch came in with his cat. Harry's heart pounded, but Les's disillusionment charm was working like a charm. Filch's eyes passed right over him a bunch of times, and he didn't even notice they were there. Filch carefully checked every hiding spot, but came up empty. Not even a ghost. Unlike the old caretaker, Mrs. Norris sensed something was off. She prowled near the corner where they were hiding, looking confused. Harry's heart was in his throat. If Mrs. Norris kept it up, Filch would notice sooner or later. Even with the disillusionment charm, they might accidentally bump into him and get busted. Just as Harry was sweating bullets, Les sprang into action. He pointed his wand and turned a metal in the corner into a big rat. The rat scurried out, scaring Filch half to death. Damn rat! Get it, dear, get it. Mrs. Norris took off after it. Filch, a total sucker for his cat, chased after them without a second thought, forgetting all about searching the room. Truth be told, after years of night patrols, he probably knew no one was in there anyway. He was just searching for his own peace of mind. Once Filch and Mrs. Norris's voices faded away, Harry and Ron let out a sigh of relief, and Les spoke. Setting up a duel, then bailing on it, and tipping off Filch. That's straight out of the Malfoy playbook. Les's voice turned cold. The Weasley and Potter boys both showed up, but little Malfoy breaks a sacred agreement. Figures, coming from a family like that. Someone actually dared to treat dueling like a joke. Les was stunned and ticked off. Draco Malfoy was just reinforcing his bad opinion of the Malfoy family. Sorry you had to see that lowlife. But Malfoy's a Slytherin, after all, so I gotta give him a chance to make things right. Les told Ron and Harry seriously. So, could you guys hang tight for a minute? I'll drag him over here. That duel's happening tonight. Harry and Ron hesitated. Malfoy had already ratted them out to Filch. Sure, Filch was gone, but who's to say Malfoy wouldn't come back and try again? The trophy room was definitely not safe anymore. Les saw their concern inside. Alright, head back first. I'll do my best to convince Draco Malfoy to go through with the duel. Your disillusionment charm should last another 15 minutes. You can get back to the common room while you're still invisible. No one will be the wiser. With that, Les hurried out of the trophy room and back to the Slytherin common room. Les's anger flared up when he saw Malfoy sound asleep in his bed. If he was still head of Slytherin, he would have kicked Malfoy out on the spot. Slytherins could be shrewd, cunning, and power-hungry, but they couldn't be totally unethical. In Les's eyes, Malfoy had crossed the line, luring someone into a duel and then sicking the caretaker on them. Draco Malfoy was scraping the bottom of the barrel. Even dark wizards, demons, aliens, and those sneaky goblins dueled fair and square. He walked over to Malfoy's bed, waved his wand to soundproof the space, then yanked off the covers and dragged Malfoy out of bed. Huh. Malfoy woke up with a start and saw Les's face. Ah. Les, it's you. Seeing Les back in the dorm safe and sound, Malfoy knew he was in trouble. He cursed Filch's incompetence under his breath, then plastered a fake smile on his face. Thanks for doing all the work. I'll settle the 50 galleons for you now. Save it. I don't want it. Les cut him off. He put a hand on Malfoy's shoulder, making Malfoy flinch. A wizard duel is a sacred thing. Since you started it, you're going to finish it. Now, you're going to write a letter to Potter and Weasley to reschedule. Malfoy avoided Les's cold stare, but gradually realized, Les and I are both just first-year Slytherins. Why should I be scared of him? Suddenly feeling braver, Malfoy stood his ground and denied setting up a duel with Harry at all. Duel? You got proof I scheduled a duel with him? Got any witnesses? Don't go making things up without any evidence. Malfoy's voice was back to its usual whiny, slick tone. Les was fuming. Some people could lie through their teeth, but he seemed to have forgotten something. This was the magical world. Les could think of 5 or 6 ways to make people tell the truth. He considered pulling the memory straight out of Malfoy's head, but then changed his mind. You don't deserve to be a student at Hogwarts. Les drew his wand and said softly. 2 balls of light shot out from the tip of his wand, one after the other, and flew into Malfoy's body. Think about what you've done, and you can become a wizard again when I think you can. After that weird warning, Les walked out of the room. Chapter 50 Squib Malfoy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Malfoy jumped when a ball of light hit him in the chest. But after he got over the surprise, nothing seemed to have happened. He checked himself over, finding nothing unusual. Malfoy instantly decided Rice was bluffing. Who does he think he is? Just because he's good at potions. He shot a mental curse at Les's bed. At the same time, he told himself, they can only expel me. No one can take away my magic. Calm down. Malfoy settled back into bed and drifted off. When he woke up the next morning, Malfoy felt great after a good night's sleep. He glanced around the dorm and saw that Les was gone, which instantly improved his mood. Les was a pain, like a turd that won't flush. He was so gross. Malfoy had it out for him, and didn't even try to hide it. As if Les heard Malfoy's thoughts, he really did start leaving early and coming home late, so Malfoy barely saw him. Malfoy had a great weekend. But that happiness screeched to a halt during Transfiguration class on Tuesday. Before we get started today, I want to check your progress from last week. Ignoring the glares from Harry and Ron, Malfoy calmly put his wand on the table and waited for Professor McGonagall. The quiz was simple: turn a match into a needle. Professor McGonagall even loosened the requirements. As long as the match changed significantly, it would show they grasped the basics. The rest was just practice. When she got to Malfoy, he grabbed his wand and gave the other students a smug look. Watch this, I'll only do it once. He'd nailed this transformation last week, perfectly turning a match into a needle. He'd noticed that nobody else in the class could do it, so this was his time to shine. He pointed his wand at the match, and it stayed a match. Malfoy. What, had the spell failed? Malfoy, determined to succeed, tried a few more times. The match on his desk remained stubbornly a match, without even a hint of metal. Cold sweat popped out on Malfoy's forehead. His voice trembled as he said, "Professor, that's not right." I. Malfoy, usually so smooth, was at a loss. How could he explain to Professor McGonagall that he could do it before, but now he couldn't do anything? Mr. Malfoy, you need to practice Transfiguration more. There's another session on Thursday. If your spell hasn't improved by then, I'll have to take further action. Professor McGonagall didn't have time to waste on Malfoy. If she spent a minute on each student, she wouldn't get anything else done. After Professor McGonagall left, Malfoy's face was pale. Big drops of sweat dripped from his forehead onto the table. Les's voice echoed in his head, "You are not worthy of being a student at Hogwarts." That he looked up sharply and saw Les perfectly transform the matches on his desk into needles. After the transformation, Les even yawned, like he wasn't even interested. Malfoy's breathing grew heavy. He forced himself to calm down, repeating, "Les is bluffing. He can't take away my magic. That's impossible, but what froze Malfoy to the core was that during the rest of Transfiguration class, he couldn't change the props in front of him even a little bit. "Mr. Malfoy, I think you should take a page from those students who are making rapid progress, like Miss Greengrass and Mr. Lint. They both nailed today's transformation." Professor McGonagall noticed Malfoy's poor performance and offered some advice after class. Malfoy opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Draco Malfoy's nightmare wasn't over. Transfiguration was immediately followed by charms. In charms, he discovered, to his horror, that he couldn't cast any spells at all. No matter how hard he tried, he could only get a few sparks from his wand. Terrified, Malfoy blocked Les, who was explaining the secret of the cutting charm to Neville Longbottom after class. "What's up?" Les asked, smiling. His friendly demeanor almost made Malfoy think that Friday night had been a dream. "You know, I'm having a little trouble here." With Longbottom nearby, Malfoy didn't want to expose his problem, so he just hinted. Les chuckled. He told Malfoy that he should keep his appointment. "Maybe your magic will come back with a poof after." Malfoy's face turned as red as a beet. He stormed out of the charms classroom. A duel. In his current state, he couldn't duel anyone. He couldn't even make sparks. If he dueled Harry, he'd get his butt kicked. Malfoy went straight to the school hospital, convinced that Madame Pomfrey could cure his illness. "So, you say you suddenly can't do magic? Has anything changed recently?" Madame Pomfrey looked at Malfoy suspiciously. "A wizard's ability to cast spells is innate." This was the first time Madame Pomfrey had heard of a wizard losing his magic and becoming a squib. Malfoy opened his mouth to tell about what Les had done to him that night, but he was horrified to find that his tongue seemed glued to the roof of his mouth. He couldn't make a sound. It's unheard of for a wizard to suddenly become a squib. "I'm not a squib." Malfoy protested angrily, like she'd slapped him, when he heard the word squib. Okay, you're not a squib." Madame Pomfrey, her patience worn thin by the interruption, thought Malfoy was just pulling a prank or trying to get out of class. It wasn't the first time she'd seen this. Compared to the symptoms of real magical ailments, pretending to lose your magic was easy and cost nothing. Go back to class. Stop worrying about what you have and don't have. Madame Pomfrey began to shoo Malfoy out. "I'm really sick." Malfoy cried anxiously. "Fine, here's something for you." Madame Pomfrey grabbed a bottle of potion that promoted digestion and restored energy directly from the cabinet, shoved it into his hand, and pushed him out of the infirmary. "Here's the update. The second update is coming soon. If you have time, you're welcome to check out my new book. It's a great investment. You can earn some coins and subscribe to it.